Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Sofa. I'm Monja and joining me tonight I've got Dave and Philip in the Edinburgh Gin Distillery, so very exciting special alcoholic episode which we're very excited about. So to get us started, do you guys mind telling us a little bit about your jobs and what you do here in the distillery?
So I'm the Experiential Ambassador for Edinburgh Gin, which sounds very grand, but basically I do exactly things like this. I kind of communicate with people and tell them how the process works, about our lovely gins, and I'll do that all over the place. So yeah,
Amazing.
It's a fun job.
Yeah, you get to go out and about a little bit then. And
Yeah, a lot, yeah, it's good.
Excellent. Sort of spread the Edinburgh Gin word.
Spread the gin love, exactly.
Yeah. And Dave, what do you do in the distillery?
So I'm the head distiller. I've been here for 7 years. So my main job is operating our lovely stills here, Flora and Caledonia. I also help to develop the gin recipes that we produce and oversee the day-to-day production of all of the gin.
Excellent. Must be a very sort of hands-on, busy job then.
It's a nice mix of some physical hands-on work, but also a lot of creative thinking and recipe design. So it's a good balance of things.
Excellent. And so can you tell us a little bit about the actual distillery then? How long has it been here?
So 2014, we've been here. Started by husband and wife, Alex and Jane Nicol. And yeah, it sort of surprises people because sort of for context, we're right down under the street, under a hotel, and you kind of don't know we're here, which is what it's like a little secret hidden distillery, which is quite cool.
It's really nice.
Yes, so yeah, as Phil says, we've been here since 2014, though we do have a second production site. That's in the biscuit factory in the Leith part of town.
Yes.
And we have a larger still there called Gin Genie, and she can produce a lot more gin than our original two stills. So Flora behind me makes 170 bottles of gin per distillation, but Gin Genie does 1,300.
Wow.
So the bulk of our production of our classic gin and now our seaside gin takes place at our larger site that we opened in the middle of 2016, but we still use our original site for making our seasonal gins.
Yeah.
That sounds like quite a lot, but in some ways we're kind of victims of our own success. And we're eventually moving, hopefully toward the end of next year, to a new site. So we'll move from this site and from the Leith site, and it's in the Arches, which are next to Waverley train station, and we'll have bigger stills there.
It's always good news for the gin lovers. More gin is never going to be a bad thing. Right, so what do you both love the most about your job?
I mean, I genuinely really like gin, so and I like talking to people, so it's a kind of perfect marriage of, and I like showing off, I'm not going to lie as well. So yeah, it's kind of a perfect marriage of all those things. Yeah, and it's just really easy to talk about. There's so many stories connected with it. There's so much going on in the making of them. It's a lovely job. Yeah.
Absolutely. Can see how that would be. Well, just every day must be quite different.
Get paid to drink gin. I mean,
yeah. What's to moan about there? Yeah. So what's your favourite parts?
I would say for me the best part of the job is completing a recipe. So when we're giving say a brief, or we want to experiment with a new botanical, and we'll do 20, 30, maybe even 40 trial distillations on a miniature still. And when you hit that point where you think, yes, this is everything I want in this recipe, everything's in perfect balance, this gin, it just tastes right. When you hit that point that you're ready to scale it up, that's an amazing feeling. Amazing.
How long does that process take then, of sort of starting from zero up to a brand new recipe?
It may not take as long as some people think. The beauty of gin is you prepare the botanicals overnight, distill it the next day, and then really all you need to do is dilute it, maybe rest it for a further 24 hours, and then taste it. So you can do maybe 2 or 3, maybe even 4 trial distillations in one day, then go back the following day and assess what worked and what didn't.
Yeah.
So yes, we may do 30, 40 trial distillations, but they could be done over a period of maybe just 2 months.
Okay.
In some cases, maybe a little longer. Some botanicals may be seasonal. For example, the gin we did with the Botanic Gardens, we can only pick the flowers that we use in that gin between Easter and about October. So there are some limitations because of seasonality, but generally speaking, we can do probably 3 months, I would say, from having an idea to having a fully developed recipe.
Amazing. So do you come up with the idea first? Do you sort of have an end gin in mind to work towards?
Sometimes it will be the distilling team will have something that we really like the idea of. Sometimes it will come from marketing saying this is something that we think will be very popular, this is something that we'd really like to have in the range, we just want you to find the necessary botanicals to do it and make a great tasting gin. So yeah, it can come from a couple of different angles, but ultimately the key is a gin that tastes great.
What's nice about working in the distillery is at like 9 o'clock in the morning, Dave will come out with samples of gin that he's working on and be like, what do you think of this? And maybe a bit less pepper and a bit more of this, Dave. And so good way to start your day.
Absolutely.
It seems a little crazy, but your senses are actually at their most receptive early in the morning. So before people have had lunch, before people have had hot drinks. So although people don't always want me to be springing gin samples on them at 9 o'clock in the morning, it is the best time to get accurate feedback on samples.
Yeah.
So that's why we often do it first thing.
That's how you start your day off. There are worse things to come into work to do. That must be nice then, sort of seeing the entire process, sort of not just from the actual distiller side, but for everyone sort of involved in the whole process then, sort of getting, Dave coming in and saying, I'm going to start working on this one, what do you think?
Well, I mean, you talk about 1670, our Botanic Gardens gin, and I mean, I remember from the discussions of that led to, and Dr. Greg Genniker from the Gardens coming in and, kind of experimenting with you and the journey that went on. So, it was lovely to kind of see that and try some of the kind of trial runs on that. And again, there are things you're working on just now, and it's lovely trying things, thinking, that might be in the shops in 6 months, a year's time,
I think one of the nicest things about working here is that the teams are very close. Obviously, the production team and the tour guiding team are separate, but we do work together on things and people feel involved. And I think when we do bring a new gin out, everyone has a little bit of a sense of attachment to it because we've all sort of seen the steps of the process as we've developed it.
No, that's really nice, and as a visitor, that's really nice then that you can sort of personally talk about every step of the way, and it took us this long to get to this point, and
like Dave said, it gives you real ownership of each gin working here, which is great.
That's brilliant. So what do visitors, what can you expect if you're coming to visit Edinburgh Gin, which I suppose at the moment is still where we are right now, eventually we'll be moving.
So if you come to this site, sometimes you have to find us first because we're not always the most obvious place to find.
Away a little bit.
But once you've found us, you'll come down into the basement, and it opens up into this fantastic space with these two beautiful handmade stills, and there we'll kind of guide you through various gins. Tell you the kind of story of distilling in Edinburgh and the kind of history of gin making, and then talk about our process. And then we've got a shop full of lots of goodies for you to help yourself to as well. So,
which is absolutely very tempting. Definitely. So are you able to give us some insight into the distilling process? You did mention, sort of before we started filming, your sort of mini distills when you're testing things out.
Yeah, absolutely. So our mini stills just run off an electric hot plate, and they'll produce roughly 1 bottle of gin per distillation, and we will do 2 or 3 dozen trial runs before we scale the recipe up. Whereas I say, Flora behind me makes about 170 bottles of gin per distillation, and when it comes to the distilling process, we will start with what's known as neutral grain spirit, which is essentially very, very high strength vodka, 96% ethanol, 4% water. It really is. The beauty is it's very simple because it's just as pure as alcohol can get. We'll then dilute that down to about 50%. So at this point, it's sort of like export strength vodka, 50% alcohol, 50% water. And then we will add the botanicals, and botanicals can be anything from the plant kingdom, be it seeds, berries, roots, flowers. The only rule for gin is the main botanical must be juniper. So that must be the predominant flavour in the final spirit. So generally at least 60, often as high as 70-75% of the botanicals that go into our recipes will be the juniper berries. And then I think the most botanicals we use in a single recipe is our Christmas gin with 15, and the fewest is our seaside gin with 9. But generally somewhere around the low teens, I think is a good number of botanicals So you get a nice bit of variety, but not so many that they're sort of cancelling each other out.
Yeah, amazing. So do you base a lot, you sort of mentioned the Botanical Gardens gin, do you base a lot sort of in the general Edinburgh, Scottish area, sort of what botanicals you use, or do you sort of venture out and choose anything depending what flavours you're going for?
I'd say there's a little bit of both. Gin is a very international spirit. Botanical influences come from all over the world. In fact, I think we've used a botanical from every continent apart from Antarctica across our range, which is quite incredible. I mean,
Our
most
snow gin is coming out next year.
I'll look forward to that.
I mean, for example, most juniper is sourced from Southeast Europe. So we have juniper from North Macedonia that we use in our classic gin that's slightly sweeter. We also have Italian juniper for our seaside gin, which is a little bit more piney and spicy. We have things like coriander seeds come from Bulgaria. We have angelica root, which is from Germany. So a lot of the fundamental classic gin botanicals do come from further afield, but we do like to have some Scottish influence in our recipes. So for example, our seaside gin has 3 botanicals from the east coast of Scotland. Our classic gin has the buds of the Douglas fir tree. It has some seeds of the milk thistle, i.e. the flower of Scotland. And of course, we have our 1670 gin, which has 5 different plants from Edinburgh's Royal Botanic Garden.
Amazing. So it's little tastes of actual Edinburgh as well.
Exactly.
Brilliant. So what makes Edinburgh gin unique then?
I mean, you've already kind of hit upon it a little bit already. There's real sourcing in the botanicals there. There is, in many cases, there's a taste of Edinburgh in there too. I think as well, I mean, you talk about the juniper and things like that. I've had a lot of gins where you can't really taste the juniper very much. So I think there's real care and craft and a real desire to get it right in all the gins that you make.
Yeah,
that really comes through.
That's definitely true.
Yeah.
We work relentlessly to make our gins not only as good as they can be in terms of their quality, but also in terms of their originality.
Yeah.
We like to use a botanical that hasn't been used before. It's very hard to do these days because there are so many gins on the market, but we do try to do something that's unique in terms of the botanical makeup. And with something like the Botanic Garden gin, with access to the plants that we have there, obviously, you know, it was easy to find a couple of things that are very exclusive, but it's often quite tricky. But I think, you know, with the seaside gin, there's quite a lot of sort of seaside themed gins on the market now. But when we launched this in 2015, I think it was probably only the second. So that was, you know, that was really covering some new ground. Even our Navy strength gin, we use Szechuan peppercorns. There's a fair few gins on the market that use Szechuan pepper now, but back in 2014, I honestly didn't know of any other gin that did. There may have been one that I didn't know about it, but there certainly weren't many. I think we like to be creative, but as Phil also said, it's about being innovative but still playing within the rules. Gin is still supposed to be a juniper flavoured spirit, and unfortunately I think there are some gins where I taste them like, is that really juniper? It's like, it's perfectly nice, maybe it's flavoured vodka rather than gin. Whereas, you know, we like to do things right and do things properly.
Sticking to the rules,
but still being creative within them.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. It's the best way to be. Amazing. So, is there anything when visitors come that really surprises them about the distilling process or about Edinburgh gin itself?
I think, like I said before, it's the fact that it's right in smack bang in the centre of a city. The castle's just back there, you know, and there's a working distillery there, and that Dave is a real person as well. Folk are like, an actual human being does it and tastes every batch himself and stuff. It's not a robot, you know.
I think that the hands-on element, as you said, people are often surprised by the size. A lot of people don't know that we have the larger site because that one's not open to the public. It's more of an industrial setting, and they see Flora in Caledonia and cannot believe that all of Edinburgh gin is made on that, because of course it's not. This is the seasonal products these days, but people are often surprised by that. I mean, pre-COVID, we did allow people to actually go inside the still room and see the gin coming off the stills. Sadly, that's not possible because it's such a confined space, and that may remain the case for the rest of the time that we're in this building. But it certainly was a good part of the experience that people really enjoyed when it was possible.
Yeah.
So now you have a situation where Dave's on the other side of the glass and we're on this side, and it's a bit like seeing the pandas at the zoo. You just sort of wave at him and he'll wave back. So yeah.
The real Dave doing
Exactly,
real distilling. Amazing. So how would you describe Edinburgh Gin to someone who has never tried it? We've got a lot of international viewers, a lot of Americans, a lot of people overseas that are maybe hoping to come to Edinburgh for the first time. And I mean, Edinburgh Gin is something that we always recommend. It's Edinburgh Gin, so it's nice to have a little sample while you're here. How would you describe it to someone who's never tried it?
I would say, first of all, Edinburgh Gin as a range has a lot of variety. We like to think that there's something for everybody. I would say that we have a strong focus on keeping our flavours interesting but balanced, and also everything tastes completely natural and actually represents the botanicals that go into them.
Amazing. Definitely worth trying. I mean, I highly recommend. And finally, before we get started on your very specific gins that we've got out, what are each of your favourite ways to drink Edinburgh Gin?
I mean, I'm quite old-fashioned. I do really just love a good old gin and tonic, but again, because like Dave's saying there, we've got such a range, I'll do different things with different gins. So we do a navy strength gin, which is 57.2% alcohol. I know this may sound bizarre. I love that neat, actually.
Okay.
To me, it's almost like drinking a cask strength whiskey. It's got that richness to it. So I either have that neat or in a martini or something like that.
Amazing. So yeah, you would think that the stronger you would want to sort of mix with the tonic, but
no, it's so nice. Yeah.
go for it. And Dave, what's your favourite?
Probably quite similar to Phil. He's right, it is counterintuitive, but the navy strength gin that we make, many people say it's the easiest one to sip neat. And likewise, that one's got such a full punchy flavour. I would use that one for cocktails, dry martini or a Negroni. And I think for things like our classic and our seaside gin, I just like a nice simple gin and tonic. Just find a good quality tonic water. I quite like the taste of gin, so maybe 2 parts tonic to 1 part gin. And if I'm at home, I don't like dilution from the ice, so I actually have, they're technically called whiskey stones that you put in the freezer, but I actually use them as gin and tonic stones.
Oh, brilliant! And then you're not changing any of the taste.
Exactly, just let you get the full flavour.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've got 3 different gins on the table here. Do you mind telling us sort of what 3 we've got and a little bit about each of them?
Okay, so we'll start with our classic gin. So this is the original Edinburgh Gin. This has been produced for more than 10 years now. It did predate this distillery. This was originally a contract distilled gin because like so many gin brands setting up, it's very difficult to have the money for the plant. So Alex and Jane Nichol, the original owners, built the brand with a master distiller in his distillery, and once it was established they set up this distillery, and this is when I come to take over the production. So classic gin is, I would say it's our all-rounder. It's a nice balance of traditional botanicals with a bit of a Scottish twist. We have a good bit of citrus in there to complement the juniper, so we've got some lime peel, orange peel and lemongrass. We have a bit of lavender for some floral notes. We have some black mulberries for a bit of a fruity aftertaste. And then I think what makes this gin a little bit special is we have both ground hazelnuts and, as I mentioned earlier, the seeds of the milk thistle, which is the flower of Scotland. Now those nuts and seeds don't really give a specific flavour or aroma to the gin. They're there for mouthfeel because they have a very thick essential oil that we extract during the distilling process, and that adds a bit of texture and viscosity to the gin, which keeps it really smooth and lets all of the other flavours stay on the palate for a bit longer.
Amazing.
Milk thistle's also good for your hangover too.
Brilliant. It's a very good tip, yeah. Super. So what else have we got here? Or do you want to go?
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, so seaside, I suppose if the selection here is the most Edinburgh Gin. And we'll maybe talk a bit while we're drinking it, but this was part of a project that we did with students from Heriot-Watt University.
Amazing.
So you may know that Heriot-Watt University, one of the many universities in Edinburgh, is home to the International Centre of Brewing and Distilling, and it's where Dave got his Masters in Distilling.
Amazing.
It's where our other 2 distillers trained. And we do a thing with them called a knowledge transfer partnership.
Okay.
And students will come and work with us on a gin that we're developing, or they'll develop a gin themselves.
Amazing.
So this was led by a group of students, and they went over to the East Coast to Dunbar, just outside Edinburgh. Sunniest place in Scotland if you've not been. And they went all around the beach and picked up various botanicals there. And I don't know if we want to talk about them just now, or maybe while we're drinking
absolutely.
it. But they picked up bladderwrack seaweed, which it pops a bit like bubble wrap when you stand on it, actually. It's a kind of a sort of salty seaweed kind of flavour. A kind of natural sweetness, though, I would say, with the seaweed too, isn't there?
Yeah. Many people don't know that as well as the savoury notes, seaweed has a very high sugar content. So you get a nice natural sweetness that balance out the more savoury, saline flavours of the seaweed.
Okay, yeah, it's quite an unexpected sort of element to seaweed, I would say.
Then it has, quite unfortunately named, scurvy grass in it, which doesn't give you scurvy, it's supposed to be a cure for it, and it's a kind of thin, wiry grass, grows on the top of sand dunes. It's a member of the mustard and horseradish family, so I suppose kind of bringing a little bit of heat and spice into
Yeah,
it.
a nice bit of warmth in the aftertaste comes from the scurvy grass.
And then we've got ground ivy, which is a kind of ivy that grows at the base of sea cliffs. Member of the parsley family?
Yes, same family as parsley and mint.
Yeah, so again, kind of herbal aspects there. Now, you wouldn't think that a gin with those botanicals in is going to be a super refreshing gin, to be honest. But bizarrely, it's probably one of our most refreshing gin and tonic gins.
Yeah.
It's kind of the one that people most associate with summer. Because usually when we serve it, we'll serve it with a citrus garnish, and there's just the citrus does something that just opens the whole gin out, and that in a big glass full of ice, maybe a bit of grapefruit peel and a sprig of thyme on a hot sunny day, on the beach.
Perfect.
It's perfect. You couldn't get a better gin.
It's exactly what you want from a seaside gin as well.
Yeah.
Sort of immediately
Light,
makes you think-
refreshing, summery.
Yeah.
It's my favourite to have a gin and tonic with on a hot day. Just one thing I would add to what Phil said is these 3 botanicals, when we did this originally as a limited edition in the summer of 2015, we actually hand-picked fresh and foraged those 3 botanicals from the area just outside Dunbar in the John Muir Country Park. However, Seaside Gin is a core part of the range now, and certainly 2 of those 3, you can only pick them for a couple of months of the year. So this is what they look like when you get them in dried from a supplier, but what we were actually had in our hands going into the still all the way back in 2015, they do actually look a bit different. Just if anyone sort of like looks them up and things like that doesn't look like the scurvy grass in the pictures, it's because it's been professionally dried by a botanical supplier.
Excellent. Yeah, if you're sort of trying to do things year round, you can always head out to the beach and
as much as I would love to go down to the beach every single week and hand pick a bag of botanicals, you have to be practical, particularly with seasonal stuff.
There's consistency with using dried botanicals as well.
That's also a good point.
Yeah, because if you're using fresh stuff, anybody who grows things in their gardens will know that something that's growing in May is going to taste different to how it's going to taste in August or September,
Absolutely.
where you dry that, you've got a consistency of flavour as well.
Brilliant. You're going to know you're going to get the same glass every time.
Exactly. Although just to contrast that, the 1670 gin that we do pick every single batch. We get the botanicals freshly clipped from the botanic garden, but when you distill it in the springtime and then the summer and then the autumn, you can't distill it in winter, unfortunately, you do notice differences. So what we'll often do is we will take sort of distillations from the 3 seasons and we'll actually vat them together to even out the inconsistencies, because different botanicals will really change their flavour profiles based upon the weather.
Yeah, that makes total sense then. So you've got to sort of balance them all out then for
You keep it as consistently as you possibly can, but if you were to get a bottle from 2018 and 2019, probably most people wouldn't, but a professional taster would probably be able to pick out a couple of little differences.
That's also sort of the beauty of it,
Exactly.
isn't it?
It's part of the fun.
Yeah, exactly. You can keep trying it and keep getting something different every time, which is lovely. Amazing.
Okay. So I was going to say yes. I was going to say we'll talk about the gin that's actually on the table.
Brilliant.
So this is our Rhubarb and Ginger Gin. So this takes our classic gin. Now, the first two gins we talked about, they're London Dry, meaning all of the flavour is added using botanicals inside the still as part of the distilling process. Once the spirit's distilled, the only thing you add is water to bring it down to bottling strength.
Okay.
So London Dry gin, all of the flavour added as part of the distilling process. Whereas with a flavoured gin, you can add extra flavour or colour or sweetener after the distilling process is done. Now, our rhubarb and ginger flavour has gone back to 2014 when we launched a rhubarb and ginger liqueur. Now, in that case, we took our classic gin, we diluted it down to 20% alcohol. So technically, it wouldn't be gin anymore because gin must be at least 37.5%. So it's a gin-based liqueur at this point. And then we will add some natural cane sugar and the rhubarb and ginger flavouring, which is all 100% natural, but it is sort of like a flavour concentrate that dissolves into the spirit. Now that was phenomenally popular and remains the biggest selling product that Edinburgh Gin make. But many people said, you know, this is very nice, but how about a full strength gin using that flavour profile? So this is what we brought out just over 2 years ago. The production process is the same, but obviously the dilution is less. The classic gin is 43. There's a very slight dilution to 40%, but that's still above the threshold to be called a gin. We add the same brilliant rhubarb and ginger natural flavouring, but we don't add quite as much. Because when it's a gin, you still want the juniper to come through. The liqueur, yes, the gin is the base, but it's about the flavour of rhubarb and ginger. Whereas the full strength gin is about a balance between the classic gin flavours and the rhubarb and ginger flavours that people enjoy in the liqueur. I would say at this strength you get maybe a little more ginger and a little less rhubarb, but it depends what flavours your palate is sensitive to. But this is 40%. It is still sweetened, but this only has 1/3 as much sugar as the liqueur. I mean, a liqueur by definition must have at least 100 grams per litre. So this is not as sweet, but definitely sweeter than a London Dry style of gin. And it really is a balance between traditional juniper and pine flavours, and then you've got the fruitiness of the rhubarb in the initial flavour, and then the dryness of the ginger in the aftertaste. Really nice garnish with some lime peel. I think lime and ginger have always been a popular combination.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing I do always say is remember that this is a gin rather than a liqueur. You should use a non-alcoholic mixer such as tonic or ginger ale. The liqueur is very popular, added into sparkling wines such as Prosecco or Cava. This one's probably a bit strong to be putting in the face.
You're going to hit it way too hard in that case.
So we're now part of a company called Ian MacLeod Distillers, who are a kind of family-run kind of whiskey company, and they have their own kind of team for kind of brand innovation and things like that. And this was really something that they spearheaded, the kind of whole idea of doing flavoured gins. It wasn't really something we'd done before. But like Dave saying, the response has been fantastic, and we have quite proudly displayed on the bottle the fact that it was awarded 95% by the International Wine and Spirit Competition.
Which I mean 95% from the International Wine and Spirits Competition, probably the most prestigious competition in the world in what we do. 95 is an incredibly high score for any gin, but for flavoured gins, which probably on average score a little bit lower than the traditional London Dry styles. That was, I think it might be the second highest score given to a flavoured gin ever by the IWSC. So that's a real recognition that I suppose some people may look down on flavoured gins as maybe being a little bit too sweet and too fruity. I think it's a recognition that we've kept the quality of our London Dry range but put it into a flavoured gin.
Absolutely. And it's nice then if you're, you know, of that way of thinking, you know that this has got the juniper coming through and is a proper gin initially, and then got the flavours sort of coming through afterwards, which is really good. Amazing. So now we're going to go through a little tasting session with the gins that we have just spoken about. So over to you, Dave.
Okay, so we will start with the Edinburgh Gin Classic, which I think is always the right place to start because this is our traditional all-round gin with a nice balance of classic flavours and a bit of a Scottish twist. So I think when you give this one a nose, you'll get a nice bit of the lavender. You should get a few citrusy notes coming off, in particular from the lemongrass. And then when you take a sip, you'll get that nice hit of juniper, pine, and then a bit of the black mulberry in the aftertaste.
I know it sounds daft, but you can really taste the juniper.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's really ginny.
Yes, it is. It really is. It's interesting as well when you actually stop and smell, and you can get all the different flavours and things coming through, which I suppose when you're drinking a gin and tonic, you don't necessarily take the time to stop and do.
We're so used to just sticking the tonic in there and a wedge of fruit or what have you, and not actually getting to grips with what the gin itself is like and what it tastes like. Yeah.
So many people are put off by the thought of sipping the gin neat because it simply isn't customary.
Yeah.
But we do invite people to just have a smell and a couple of sips neat to really get a feel for the botanicals and the flavour profile. And then by all means, we're going to add some tonic in, add some garnish in. But it's just sort of like giving people a really good idea of what the gin's all about.
Absolutely.
Now, I just panicked there, thinking that I'd lost my house keys, but I loaned my fob to you, Phil.
Are you looking for a bottle opener?
I'm looking for a bottle opener, but I would like my keys back as well, please.
Yeah. You will get your keys back, don't worry.
Not to panic.
Shall we try it with some garnish first before we try it with tonic, or do you want to do...
You see, you and me disagree on this, don't we? Because I always go tonic and then garnish, whereas you go garnish and then tonic.
Yeah.
Well, alright, we'll do it your way today.
Okay, I've done some truly massive peels of orange here, so you might want to
I'm going to trim this down a little bit,
bit,
given we're just having small samples,
I think
but
you
yeah.
want to go for that one.
Orange peel is definitely the way to go. I mean, you can garnish classic gin with lemon or lime. It's a citrusy gin, that still works. But I think lemon and lime are a little bit sharper. I think orange is a little bit sweeter, a little bit more mellow. I just think it really brings all the flavours together.
It does change the texture. Kind of softens it, I find. Yeah.
It's softer, it's definitely a little sweeter as well. And I think when you get a dash of the tonic in, I'll let you pour your own. As you can see, I don't like too much tonic, just that about 2 to 1.
And we're using the classic Indian Fever Tree tonic for this. The reason for that is a lot of tonics can be quite bitter. This one's actually got a little bit of sweetness to it. It's not a heavily flavoured tonic, so it's letting that flavour of the gin come through. It's not overpowering it.
Yeah.
So yeah, overall I just think an all-round refreshing gin and tonic, good bit of juniper, a good bit of citrus.
Amazing. So orange is the way to go with your classic then?
It's definitely the one I would recommend.
Yeah.
But as I say, if you've only got lemons or limes available, that's not going to ruin it. It's still going to taste great. But I think orange brings the flavour out more than anything else.
Amazing.
Nice start of the morning.
It is. It's just so drinkable.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It says something sort of fresh and yeah.
Yeah, I would say the classic is an overall refreshing gin and tonic. I would argue, particularly in the hot weather, the seaside is maybe even more refreshing still. As we mentioned earlier, this has only 9 botanicals as opposed to classic gin's 14, so it's not quite as oily. It doesn't quite have that same viscosity, but it does have a very soft flavour profile. So it's sippable for different reasons as opposed to the classic. Cheers, Phil.
Thank you.
I hope you've not got a lot planned after this.
So I think when you smell the seaside, there'll be a much more, should we say, obvious aroma hits you, rather than just sort of like that sort of like balanced, mellow aroma from the classic. You will get that seaweed hit.
But going from the classic to the seaside, there is such an obvious difference, I think, in the smell between the two. You know they're different gins.
Absolutely, but this is the beauty of gin. They have more in common by far than they have differences there. They're still about 2/3 juniper, about 15% coriander, 5% angelica. It's the last 10% where the botanical makeup is actually different, but look at what a difference it makes.
Yeah.
But that's the key. Always keep juniper as the main botanical, and just play other botanicals off it, and you can create very different expressions.
Because when we talked about the herbal things, about the kind of natural sweetness, I mean, there's a lot of that coming through on this.
I mean, I think definitely the seaweed, and I get a bit of scurvy grass in the aroma as well. And then I taste that, and there's a nice sort of there's a little bit of a tang to it. It's always important to stress the gin is not salty. Salt does not distill over. But there is that sort of mineral flavour and that tang of the sea air that you get from the seaweed. That for me, it hits you, it's very crisp, and then the sweetness comes through after it. I think this gin is probably the most different with and without tonic.
Okay.
I think a little splash of tonic really brings out the sweeter notes. I think it's quite herbal and savoury when it's neat, and then really opens up when we add the tonic.
And equally, let's do your way this time.
Okay, all right, we'll do tonic and then garnish this time, that's fair.
So the tonic that we're serving with this one is Fever Tree Mediterranean, which has lemon balm in it.
Okay.
And again, that citrus is kind of changing the characteristics of the gin. But if you want to go the other way with that, serve it with a light tonic, serve it with soda water. You could make a dirty martini with it. You could garnish it with seaweed, with samphire, so yeah,
Thank you.
it's a gin that can be quite different depending on what you do with it. Yeah,
Experiment a little bit and.
Yes, I feel that the tonic brings the other aromas out a little bit more. You're not getting quite as much of the seaweed, but it's still definitely there. But
well, it's less a sea salt, isn't it? It's more a salinity.
Yeah, exactly. It's more salinity.
Briny. Kind of. Going to stick some grapefruits in mine.
I was going to say, a little sliver of grapefruit. And yeah, I mean, as Phil was saying, this can also work really well garnished with something green to bring out the herbal flavours. So samphire, when it's in season, is lovely. Thyme, rosemary. But if you were wanting to stick with citrus, I think the pink grapefruit is just that slightly more summery, sort of zesty flavour, and I think it really complements this gin.
Perfect for a sunny day.
I just go back to what I said before, though. It is so refreshing as a gin and tonic as well. Okay, so something a little bit different now, because the two gins that we've had are very much that classic London dry style gin. I suppose the style that most people are familiar with, but flavoured gin is just a whole different kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're moving from London dry to a flavoured gin. So this gin will be a little sweeter, a little fruitier, but it is made with the Edinburgh Gin Classic. So those notes that we got in the first tasting of the juniper, the pine, the citrus, those will still be there, but you'll be getting an initial fruity rhubarb flavour and a spicy ginger aftertaste.
Thank you.
And actually, when it comes to a flavoured gin, I'm actually in agreement with Phil. I think garnish first, then tonic. Yeah, I do dry and flavoured slightly different.
So is that the only one that you would sort of switch it up a bit there?
Yeah, this one I would have a sip neat first, as we have done. Then I would try it with the lime, and then we'll add a little bit of the tonic in.
Okay.
So yeah, you get quite a lot of rhubarb in the aroma, and the ginger tends to come through more in the aftertaste.
Now, I know we're talking about gin and tonics here, but I think a mojito made with that could be
that
really
would be
nice.
Very good, yes. Gin mojito.
So yeah, you get that nice bit of heat from the ginger coming through. But as we always stress, yes, there's a lot of nice fruit flavour going on, but it's still ginny.
Yeah.
It still retains the body and the structure and the juniper notes of the classic gin, albeit with some extra layers of flavour. And yes, I do particularly like this one with a bit of lime in. So we're gonna pop the garnish in. I mean, I think lime and ginger has always been a winning partnership. So you put rhubarb into the equation as well, and they just play off each other brilliantly.
Classic combo.
You see, for me, the lime, it does two things. First off, it slightly breaks up the sweetness of the gin, because I'm more of a dry gin drinker. I think this gin's brilliantly balanced, but it's still maybe a little sweeter than I would normally drink.
Mm-hmm.
A squeeze of lime or a wedge of lime, that will just nicely break up the sweet notes, but it also breaks up the tanginess of the ginger. So everything's just really well integrated when you get the lime in.
I get more of the individual flavours, even just having that bit of lime in there, it does break it up.
There's a sense of separation that rhubarb and ginger and lime, they're harmonised, but you're picking them up individually. Which is why I just think everything's like really in balance here. Now, for this one, we're going to go for a light tonic. I think as this is a flavour, gin is a little sweeter. I think a light tonic, just so you're not making this overly sweet. A light tonic will really bring out the crispness of the ginger, whereas if you use, shall we say, a full fat or a Mediterranean tonic, it will probably bring out a bit more of the sweetness of the rhubarb. So it does depend on your taste. I personally like to go for a light tonic.
Ginger ale is a really nice mixer with this too.
Ginger ale, again, works really well. So for me, that's flavoured gin done right. Not excessively sweet, not sickly, not gloopy. Still sort of ginny, but with a nice bit of fruit flavour and spice in the aftertaste.
I suppose is that the sort of main difference then between going for the liqueur versus the sort of actual gin then?
Absolutely. If you go for the liqueur, it is a more syrupy texture. It is very sweet. There's no getting away from that. Some people love that, and that's great. It's still got the great rhubarb and ginger flavour. But for me, I like that balance of the fruit flavour with the traditional gin flavour.
Absolutely. Well, that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing some of your knowledge with us and sort of giving us an insight into the whole Edinburgh Gin sort of background, a bit of the distilling process as well. We do have some Edinburgh Gin in our Edinburgh store. So if you're coming for your measuring experiences, you can sample a little bit in store. And otherwise, we are opposite each other basically.
Come see us, come visit us.
Absolutely. It's definitely something to do while you're in Edinburgh. And Phil and Dave, I'm sure you will be here to talk to people, show people around.
We're here most days.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful learning a bit more of the process. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.